Hello and welcome to Medicine with a Fork, a podcast from the educational nonprofit Gaples Institute. Our mission is to advance the role of nutrition and lifestyle in medicine. I'm your host, Jeanette Brooks, and in today's episode, we're covering the remarkable way that the brain is influenced by what a patient eats and how gut health plays a major role. Joining me today is the Gaples Institute's Executive Director, Dr. Stephen DeVries. He's a preventive cardiologist, and he's also part of the Nutrition Department's faculty at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Jeanette.
Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, great to be with you.
Yeah. So first, I wanted to get a big picture view of the landscape. We're talking about what is commonly referred to as the microbiome. Can you paint a picture of what that looks like?
The microbiome is really vast. It includes roughly 100 trillion microorganisms. Wow. Now, it's crazy to get a handle on that huge number. Imagine the entire world's population. Now multiply that number by 1,500, and that's the number of microorganisms that make up our microbiome.
And that's just in one person, right?
Exactly. It's crazy. And to put that number into perspective, the microbiome outflanks us by a wide margin, as it contains roughly 10 times the number of human cells that are in our own body. Now, these microbes are tiny, but they're mighty, as they're strongly linked to our health in so many ways, with proven links to our immune system, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and so much more. But what's less well appreciated, and the subject of our conversation today, is the emerging evidence that links our microbiome to brain health.
Yeah, so let's hear a little bit more about that. How does the food that we eat affect these tiny microbial partners in our microbiome?
Diet has a very substantial impact on our microbiome, and fiber in particular plays a major role. So dietary fiber, by definition, consists of carbohydrates that humans just don't have the enzymes to digest. So they pass through the small intestines right to the colon. Now, once in the colon, dietary fibers, although they can't be digested by humans, serve as the substrate for our microbial partners, where they're metabolized through anaerobic fermentation. In fact, fiber, although not great food for human digestion, is actually the preferred energy source for our microbiome. And so high intake of dietary fiber promotes the abundance and diversity of microbial species that are strongly linked to a wide range of health benefits. And here's where it gets really interesting, because a healthy and diverse microbiome, supported by ample intake of this dietary fiber we're talking about, serves as an actual metabolic factory that produces very high levels of short-chain fatty acids. And the best studied of these short-chain fatty acids is butyrate. Now, butyrate and other short-chain fatty acids have a multitude of health benefits, including preserving the integrity of the enterocytes that line the colon wall, as well as possessing potent anti-inflammatory properties.
That's really fascinating. I love that image of a metabolic factory. It's just churning out these important compounds for our health. So you described fiber being the best input to that factory. And we know that there are different types of fiber, right? Wondering about that. Do all types of fiber have the same beneficial effect?
Great question. Dietary fibers actually are not all alike. And the type of fiber actually does matter. So soluble fiber appears to be the most preferred of the microbial substrates. And foods that have a particularly high concentration of soluble fiber include whole grains like oats and barley, and some vegetables and fruit, especially apples, pears, and citrus.
That's really helpful to identify some specific foods. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I've seen in the grocery aisles how some products are now being marketed as high fiber. There are like high fiber snack bars. I've even seen bread products that are out there advertised as having a surprising amount of fiber, even though they look more processed. They look like white bread. So what's the backstory there? Where's that fiber coming from?
That's really interesting. If you look at the ingredient list in some of these high fiber foods, you might see ingredients that are not familiar to you. One of the most commonly observed ones is inulin. And inulin is a fiber that's found naturally in less commonly consumed foods. Foods like Jerusalem artichoke, which looks like a root. It is not like the common artichoke that you might be more familiar with, as well as in chicory. And more recently, inulin has been concentrated and, as you said, added to processed foods, in some cases to make the fiber content look especially promising. In other cases, because of its intrinsic foaming ability, it's often used as a culinary substitute for fats. And so, again, not all fibers help the microbiome in the same way. And the microbial response to inulin, at least in some studies, is less robust than with soluble fiber that's naturally present in whole foods.
Interesting. So I guess the takeaway there is that the more we can get fiber from whole foods, that's probably the better choice.
Certainly.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about how certain foods influence how prolific and how healthy our gut microbes are. But what's the crossover here to brain health? That seems like an unlikely partnership. And I want to learn more about that.
Yeah, exactly. It is unlikely by appearance, but the inside story is actually fascinating. Our microbiome and the metabolic byproducts that it produces actually can communicate with the brain in two major ways. First, by stimulating the vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system. And second, through the generation of compounds that enter the circulation and actually can cross the blood-brain barrier. Now, the vagus nerve, which is the largest of the nerves in the autonomic nervous system, sends both efferent signals to the gut that mediate things like contraction of smooth muscle in the gut and glandular secretions of the gut. As well, the vagus can act as a transmission line for afferent signals that originate in the gut and are transmitted to the brain. In fact, the vagus is a bidirectional highway and can be triggered to activate the brain by signals received by chemoreceptors located in the gut wall. One particularly important compound that can activate these vagal chemoreceptors in the gut is a well-known neurotransmitter, serotonin. And many will be surprised to learn that over 90% of the body's serotonin is actually made in the gut. So you've heard the saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but apparently that's not true when it comes to our microbiome. Because the important role of the vagus nerve in mediating these signals from the gut to the brain is further highlighted in a study where positive behavioral changes that were observed in animals after they were given certain probiotics were no longer observed after a vagotomy procedure, which actually further highlights the important role of the vagus in this communication link between the microbiome and the brain.
That is really amazing. And to think that 90% of our serotonin comes from the gut, that's remarkable. And we know that serotonin plays a major role in mood. So can you say a bit more about how specific brain functions are linked to the microbiome?
Sure. Both cognitive function and neurologic illnesses, including depression, have clear associations with our microbiome. And a unifying mechanism that likely explains a lot of that relationship is the microbial-mediated production of short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids have potent anti-inflammatory properties that can reduce cerebral inflammation that's been linked to depression.
Wow. What else do we know, Steve, about the connection between our gut health and cognition?
One really enlightening study that highlights the connection is one where over 600 individuals were studied. They obtained fecal samples from them and observed their microbial diversity and studied that in relationship to several measures of the individual's cognitive function. And then when they assessed the relationship, they adjusted for key health behaviors and clinical risk factors. It turned out that the diversity of microbes was significantly linked to multiple measures of cognitive function. And when they examined the genre of the bacteria, it appeared that a predominance of the type of bacteria that are most prolific at making these anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acids were the ones most closely associated with better cognitive function.
Interesting. So can we circle back to depression for a second? I want to learn a little bit more about what the data says about that. How do depressive symptoms respond to gut health?
What's interesting is that reduced colonies of certain anti-inflammatory butyrate-producing bacteria are associated with depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and anxiety. So it does seem like the composition of the microbiome really does have an association with some very significant neurologic disorders. Now, added to that is a particularly fascinating study, one in which depressive behaviors were literally transplanted via the microbiome. Now, it sounds incredulous, but in this study, fecal samples from clinically depressed patients were transplanted to microbiota-depleted rats. And their effect on the animal's behavior was compared to those animals that received fecal transplants from healthy control patients. Now, compared to the controls, the animals that received fecal samples from patients with depression exhibited more anxiety-like behaviors, including lack of interest in exploring novel settings and lack of interest in drinking their usually preferred sugar water. So it did seem like the microbiome transplanted from depressed patients had a very significant impact on the behavior of these animals.
Yeah, and that's really significant, right? Because it ties everything back to the microbiome and that influence. It's like one of the major keys to the mental health of these patients. That's fascinating. So 1,000-foot view here, how does this link between our microbiome and our brain health inform our general understanding of the relationship between nutrition and overall health?
It's a great question. And I would have to say that when we're talking about the diet that impacts our microbiome and our general health, it's all variations on a theme. Because for better mental health, as well as improved cardiovascular health, freedom from diabetes, and so forth, the best advice is to encourage healthy dietary patterns that have been well established that can promote all of those goals. They include the so-called MIND diet, the Mediterranean diet, and plant-based whole food diets. All of these encourage plentiful intake of vegetables, fruit, whole grains over refined grains, and avoidance of fried and ultra-processed foods.
So given all of this data, given our current understanding, what's your best advice to clinicians who are wanting to add the benefits of diet to their patients' cognitive and emotional health? What would you tell these clinicians?
Great, because there is a takeaway, and that is the key feature is to load up on foods that we already know have a wide range of health promoting properties. So we've talked about fiber, specifically soluble fiber, is being especially impactful for a diverse and healthy microbiome. And the advantage of all of the diets I mentioned is that they all emphasize generous portions of foods that are naturally rich in soluble fiber. So another category of foods that we haven't discussed you might want to consider are fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, fermented vegetables, and kombucha. They've all been shown to increase microbial diversity and to reduce inflammatory markers. So in addition, there are some studies in animals and some smaller clinical studies that show that adding certain probiotics, that is the introduction of healthy bacteria, typically done in pill form, is another strategy that may improve cognitive function and counter depression. But I have to say those studies are still in their early phases and not ready to be recommended just yet, but stay tuned.
This has been really eye-opening and really hopeful, actually, that a healthy diet can make such a difference in both mental health and our cognitive function.
That is so true. We still have a lot to learn, but we already know enough to make a big difference.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for shedding light on this really important topic today.
Oh, it's been great speaking with you.
For clinicians who want to leverage the powerful ways that nutrition can improve patient health, we invite our listeners to check out the nonprofit Gaples Institute's interactive nutrition course for health professionals. It's a 4-credit CME course that digs deeper into nutrition science and has practical strategies for how you can guide patients toward a healthier diet. It's available at nutritionfordocs.org. That's nutrition, FOR, docs.org. And there is a discount available for AMA members who enroll. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Medicine with a Fork.